Before the National Day holiday, a new intern, claiming to be the company's heiress, berated me the moment she walked in, accusing me of seducing her father. Everyone in the office became her toadies. They lauded her as a wealthy young lady while simultaneously insulting me as shameless, subjecting me to workplace bullying. The heiress was extremely pleased. She lavishly booked an expensive hotel for a company dinner, spending hundreds of thousands of yuan in one night. But when she reached for her card to pay, she found it was empty. Panic seized her. Meanwhile, I walked over to her, flashing my card to the waiter. With the heiress' face turning pale, I smiled faintly. "I'm sorry, my mom said that family money shouldn't be used to support outsiders," I said. "So, the cards belonging to you and my father? I've had them all frozen." Before the National Day holiday, a new intern came to our department. She bore a striking resemblance to me. My colleague Charles winked at me. "Vivian, are you two half-sisters maybe?" he joked. It was just a jest, and I was about to play along when another colleague, Gary, scoffed. "With your looks, where do you get the audacity to call yourself the young lady's sister? Don't you have any self-awareness?" Ever since I joined the company, Gary had always been inexplicably hostile towards me. My mother had arranged for me to intern at our own company, warning me to hide my identity and blend in. So I held Charles back, who was about to retort, and joined the office gossip. "Did you see? The person who brought her in was Mr. Zhang's personal assistant. Oh yeah, and the car keys she had, those were for a Maserati. Didn't Director Lee mention that Mr. Zhang just bought his daughter a new Maserati last month?" Considering these points, they all concluded that the fair-skinned beauty, Nina Zhang, was the CEO's daughter. I was taken aback for a moment. There was indeed a sports car downstairs. The license plate was exactly the same as mine, also bought by my father. He had said it was in for maintenance today, though. He'd also said that since I was just there for an internship, I shouldn't drive such a flashy car and risk making my colleagues envious. How did the car and the heiress status suddenly become Nina's? Nina waved her hand confidently and ordered Starbucks for all 50 people in the office as a welcome treat. I pushed the matter aside for the time being. When the delivery came and everyone had their order, mine was missing. My colleagues turned to look at me. Charles even asked, "Vivian, didn't you order yours?" I did. I had even double-checked it was my usual order. How could mine be the only one missing? At that moment Nina spoke. "I deleted yours." I froze in place, the question I was about to ask still unsaid as Nina continued. "When I came to the office today, I saw you in the elevator, standing too close to my father, almost leaning on him." Nina sneered. "Do you have no shame, Vivian Xia? How old is my father? And you're still trying to cling to him?" Nina's words sent my blood rushing to my head. I couldn't even care about the missing coffee and stood up abruptly. "What nonsense are you talking about? Who is clinging to your father? And who even is your father?" Nina's smile grew more contemptuous. "You're taking money from my father and trying to seduce him. And yet you say you don't know who he is? Your double-faced tactics are really something." Her words revealed her identity. My colleagues, seeing the designer clothes and the handbag, and considering her lavish order of 50-plus cups of Starbucks, were convinced that Nina was telling the truth. Gary, who had just mocked me earlier, rolled his eyes. "I knew it, she likes to run to the boss's office every other day, so she wants to become the boss's wife?" "No, I was just going to give my dad." My explanations were drowned out by the voices of my colleagues. They clearly didn't know the truth and weren't on the same elevator as me this morning, but when it came to criticizing me, they spoke like they had witnessed everything themselves. "You know, Vivian Xia did try to seduce the boss. I saw her in the elevator, edging closer to him. Mr. Zhang could be Vivian's father's age. Isn't she being too desperate? She'll do anything for money, such a shameless face. It's funny, she thinks she can take advantage while Mr. Xia is abroad managing branches, and now she's caught in the act." Snap! A cup of ice-cold coffee along with ice cubes was dumped on my desk. The report I had stayed up all night to prepare and print was ruined. The instigator, Gary, glared at me without fear, raising an eyebrow. "Oops, sorry. My hands tend to shake when I see nasty people, especially if I feel like slapping them." Gary's arrogant face made me furious. I grabbed the soaked report from my desk and threw it at her. The cold coffee splashed all over Gary. She screamed and yelled my name. Vivian Xia, have you lost your mind? Gary had just bought the dress a few days ago, and I'd heard it cost several thousand yuan. She had been showing it off all morning. She even sighed, saying, "My husband just wanted to buy it for me, I couldn't stop him." Seeing her so enraged and ready to hit me, I didn't flinch. I simply pointed to the security camera in the corner. The company prohibits fighting. Violators will be dismissed. Gary, are you sure you want to break company rules? Gary seemed to have been splashed with cold water. She forcefully calmed down, looking at her stained dress. Biting her teeth, she said, "Then what you did to your colleague isn't a violation." I smiled faintly. Sorry, it was an accident. Because my hand, just like yours, can't help but move when I see someone being nasty. Gary was about to explode. Nina's face had also darkened. She stepped forward, seemingly about to say something, when my father's assistant knocked on the door and signaled Nina to come out. Nina had no choice but to give up on causing trouble, walking out of the office. But as she passed by me, she whispered a threat. "Shameless thing, you wait. I'll have my dad kick you out of this company right now." As Nina was called away, the department leader also cleared his throat and signaled everyone to begin the weekly meeting. He projected data onto the whiteboard and then called out to me. "Vivian, did you print out the data you were working on yesterday?" I nodded, calmly picking up the wet reports from the floor and distributing them to each of my colleagues. The reports were not only soaked in coffee, with cold liquid dripping from them, but also covered in dust from the floor and hair from the female colleagues. The leader's face turned green. "Vivian Xia, what is this? Are these reports even usable?" I glanced at Gary's pale face, stood up and bowed my head. The reports were fine 5 minutes ago, but I don't know why Gary poured coffee on my desk. I know I must have done something wrong to upset Gary. I told her the data was important, but I knew the art of playing the victim well, and started to shed tears. "I'm sorry, Director. It's my fault for not stopping Gary, please scold me." Gary jumped to her feet, her face white as a ghost. "What are you talking about? You didn't tell me it was the director's data when I splashed the coffee." She quickly shut her mouth. What she said basically confirmed she deliberately poured the coffee on the report. The director stared coldly at her for half a minute. He suddenly raised his hand and threw all the wet, dirty reports at Gary. His face was stern as he pointed towards the door. "Get out, and you're not needed for this meeting." Gary bit her lip, and the words she was about to say were blocked by the director's cold gaze. She vented her anger on me. She glared at me hatefully before reluctantly pushing the door to leave. The director waved for me to sit down. I crossed my legs and spun my pen, thinking my mother was right. The director's surname was Zhao. I'd heard she'd been with the company for many years. In the early days when the company was still a mess before my mother cleaned it up, she had been subjected to workplace harassment, bullying, and malicious rumors from her superiors. So the director couldn't stand such disgusting underhanded tactics. Gary's actions had definitely stepped on a landmine. Not having her fired immediately was already a mercy due to her being a longtime employee. Halfway through the meeting, Nina arrived late. Whether intentional or not, she went straight to my side and kicked my chair. "Get up, I want that seat." There were so many people in the meeting room and I was sitting at the edge. I didn't believe Nina would have wanted my particular seat. I ignored her. However, several colleagues eagerly tried to please her, quickly standing up and wiping down the warm chair. "You can sit here, the lighting is good, and you can see the projection clearly." Nina, however, refused and kept staring at me, demanding I get up. Even the director, aware of her status, couldn't tolerate her behavior. "Nina Zhang, what are you doing? If you want to attend the meeting, attend properly. Don't interrupt your colleagues." Nina glanced at her, showing the arrogance of a privileged young lady. "This company belongs to my family, where else should I sit? And this woman has been trying to seduce my father. You're standing up for her? Director Zhao, don't tell me you have your eyes on my father as well." The director's face fell. Seeing she was about to argue with Nina, I quickly stood up. Fine, if you like this seat, you can have it. I'll find another place, okay?" Unfortunately, as soon as I stood to move, Nina was pleased. She blocked my way, a mocking smile on her face. Vivian Xia, are you planning to run out of the meeting room and secretly complain to my father? I'm telling you, he's my real dad and he loves me the most. Even if you succeed in seducing him, you still don't have the right to be arrogant in front of me. Perhaps their spoiled young lady temperaments were all the same. Nina had only said a few words when her eyes started to blaze. Director Zhao sighed, but did not stop Nina from slapping me. The loud slap echoed in the meeting room. Within 2 hours, everyone in the company knew about the rumors. I had tried to seduce the CEO and got slapped by his daughter as a result. I browsed the company internal chat. My colleagues, acting like they had inside information, were revealing the background of Nina's family and how expensive the Maserati was. Then in the next moment they began to belittle me. They disdainfully commented on my clothes, shoes, and bags, saying they must all be knockoffs because they had never seen them in the mall. I watched as they called me dirty, shameless, and spread rumors of me trying to seduce an old man for money. Tears welled up in my eyes. Clutching my phone, I sent a message to my mother, telling her about the bullying I endured and Nina's supposed heiress identity. But she was nearly 8 hours behind in time difference, and even for a powerful woman, she would most likely be asleep at this hour. I stared at the densely packed chat box and lost my appetite for lunch. I pressed the elevator button for the 21st floor, wanting to get answers from my father. The moment the elevator doors opened, I saw Nina clinging to my father's arm, pouting and acting cute. Dad, you don't know. That woman in our department is so shameless and she even gave me attitude. I'm your beloved daughter. You have to stand up for me and kick her out of the company. My father looked doting as he agreed and then raised his head, making eye contact with me. My father's face showed nervousness as he subconsciously pulled his arm from Nina's. I coldly watched him, a hint of a mocking smile on my lips. How coincidental, Dad, am I interrupting you and your new daughter's bonding session? Nina wasn't stupid. She could sense something was off from my father's expression and my attitude. She subconsciously went to grab my father's arm, wanting answers. However, the dad was barely out of her mouth before my father dodged her hand. Nina looked confused. Dad, why is Vivian Xia calling you Dad? Who is she? My father, who usually doted on her, didn't have time to answer her questions. He had his assistant take her away and asked her not to stay on the 21st floor. I watched coldly as he arranged everything, as if he could fool anyone. He even had the audacity to smile at me. Vivian, why did you suddenly come to the company? You should have told your father beforehand. He was pretending to be casual as he pulled out a chair for me. That was Nina from my relative's house. She's close to me, so she calls me Dad. Don't think too much of it and don't tell your mother. How ridiculous. In all my life, I'd never heard of relatives being so close that they called each other father. I gave a fake smile. Which relatives? I'll ask her. Does her real father know about her calling you Dad? Hey, you girl. Seeing that I was about to investigate, my father quickly changed the subject and asked me about my internship, though he didn't seem to really mean it. I barely said a few words before he began to lecture me. With your spoiled bratty attitude, you'll definitely cause trouble during your internship. Which company would accept you? You are just like your mother, spoiled rotten. I rolled my eyes. My clenched fists barely remembered to adhere to civilized behavior as I suppressed the urge to send him flying with a punch. He kept talking and I interrupted, too lazy to keep listening. Did Nina just tell you that there was a woman in her department who tried to seduce you, and that she already taught her a lesson? My father paused. How did you know? I smirked, turned my head to show my slightly fading red cheek, and smiled disingenuously. I'm sorry, Dad, but the person she taught a lesson to was me. My father was stunned, jumping to his feet. But his concern wasn't about Nina's actions. Instead, he interrogated me. Aren't you supposed to be interning? Why are you in Nina's department? You? Oh yeah, I'm interning at our own company. Is that a problem? My father's panicked expression didn't escape my notice. I still managed to smile at him and flashed my phone. Of course, I've also told my mother that a young lady has come to the company. I thought he would panic or immediately kick Nina out, but what he did was that after half an afternoon of devising a solution, he found the HR department to fire me. I was stunned when I received the HR message saying they wanted to discuss my dismissal. The message appeared on the computer screen, my silence, attracting the attention of Charles, who was going to talk to me. He turned to look at the screen and gasped in shock. Vivian, are you being fired? Most of the 50-plus people in the department were buried in their work, even speaking in hushed tones. Charles, shocked, hadn't controlled his volume, and his words echoed through the entire office. The colleagues clearly heard it as well, and they all looked up, their gossipy gazes converging on me from all directions. I hastily closed the message. I looked at Charles, who was panicked and at a loss for words, knowing he had spoken out of turn, and sighed. You saw wrong. They just wanted to talk about something. Charles was almost in tears, covering his mouth and nodding vigorously. As I walked out of the office, I heard Nina's voice behind me. I didn't know how my father had deceived her or what kind of promises he had made, but Nina was calm and collected that afternoon at work, as if nothing had happened. Her occasional glances at me, however, were filled with disdain, contempt, and mockery. At that moment, she was leaning back in her chair, watching a show on her computer, and curled her lip with a sneer. Some people love to dream about being a peasant girl becoming a phoenix, she said. Too bad. Dealing with people like that is as easy as crushing them between my fingers. The colleagues, who were eager to suck up to the heiress, burst into loud laughter. I scoffed and closed the office's glass door, shutting out the noise. She wanted to play the heiress and step all over me? I'd wait and see where Nina's confidence would come from when my mother came back. Perhaps HR's orders were to get rid of me at all costs, because the offer was unusually generous, and the compensation was surprisingly substantial. He cleared his throat. Miss Xia, are you satisfied with our compensation? So, he pushed the termination agreement towards me. Please sign at the bottom right corner. Remember to write in block letters. His tone implied that I couldn't refuse the offer and would obediently sign. However, after just one glance, I looked up at him. What if I don't accept? HR seemed displeased. Our compensation is already the highest in the industry. You wouldn't get this much money at any other company. He forced a smile. Does Miss Xia want to pursue related work in the future? It's not bragging, but our company is among the best. If you refuse to accept the termination terms, I would have no other choice but to share your information with our friendly affiliates. Although I had only worked for less than a month, I understood the threatening undertones loud and clear. If I didn't agree to the termination, they'd make sure I couldn't survive in the industry. I glanced at the amount of the compensation. It wasn't even enough to cover the cost of the shoes I was wearing. I rolled my eyes, took the termination agreement, and in front of HR's expectant look, tore the newly printed sheets into shreds. The pieces fluttered and fell onto his head as he watched with an outraged expression. I smirked. I'm sorry, this little bit of money is not something I'm interested in. I refused HR's request, ignored his furious gaze, and slowly walked back to the department office. As soon as I entered, I heard colleagues surrounding Nina, excitedly talking about something. When they saw me enter, their excited looks turned into contempt, especially Gary. Her expensive dress still had coffee stains she couldn't get rid of. Even though she hated me, Gary didn't dare to cause any more trouble. She just glared at me and turned back to sucking up to Nina. I ignored Gary and went back to my desk. When I pulled out the chair to sit down, Gary also stood up, smiling brightly. It's settled then. Tomorrow is the first day of the National Day holiday, so let's have a department dinner to welcome Nina. Let's book the Manhwa Hotel. Meet at 9:30 a.m. Any objections? My colleagues cheered, some of them audibly surprised. Manhwa? Really? That Manhwa with a per capita spend of 5,800 yuan. The young lady's treating, of course, it won't be small scale. Just wait for the feast. I didn't join the conversation. Considering Nina had targeted me since the day she came to the department, she probably wouldn't invite me to this dinner. However, Nina called my name specifically. She smiled brightly. Vivian Xia, you should come too. Aren't you going to be fired? Consider it a farewell dinner. How could I not see the triumph on her face, the condescending pity? She most likely knew I was asked to leave because my father had arranged it. So, did she think my father was helping her get revenge? I smiled faintly, my pen leaving deep marks on the paper. Sure, if the heiress is treating, of course I'll come. The hours before the holiday were the most difficult to endure. Charles was constantly looking at the clock. Finally, when the end-of-day bell rang, everyone cheered, packing their things, ready to go home. They were looking forward not just to the National Day holiday, but also to Nina's dinner. As I walked out of the office, I even heard some colleagues whispering about what they would eat at Manhwa tomorrow. Nina was at the front, and Gary followed her like her shadow. When they reached the parking lot and saw the dazzling Maserati, Gary was mesmerized, unable to hide her envious expression. Nina glanced at her, smirking. "You like it? Want to get in? I'll give you a ride." Gary's was so happy she couldn't speak clearly. "Oh, really?" Nina nodded naturally. Watching Gary excitedly rush to the passenger seat, my colleagues showed envy and jealousy as well. Charles walked beside me. "Wow, Gary is so lucky. I also want to ride a Maserati. Vivian, what are you doing?" I opened an app on my phone. As Nina was about to open the car door, I pressed the lock button on my phone. Nina, enjoying the envy of all, had placed her hand on the door handle, ready to open it when the door wouldn't budge. She frowned and pressed the unlock button on the key. The car beeped twice, indicating it was unlocked. Then I pressed the lock button again. Nina was still unable to open the door. This went on for almost 10 minutes. Nina was dumbfounded, her face turning dark. Gary, oblivious, offered to help. "Nina, is the car broken? Why can't we open the door?" Nina frowned and replied, "How would I know? You know how to open it." Gary didn't dare to speak. At that moment, some people walked up to the car, checking the license plate and stopping nearby. "Excuse me," one said. "We are from the 4S dealership. We received a call from the owner about a malfunction." Gary was overjoyed. "See, Nina? I told you the car was broken." Nina's expression was strange. "I didn't call you. Maybe you have the wrong person?" The employee paused for a moment, recited the license plate and phone number. "We did receive a call from Ms. Xia, a VIP client. Are you Ms. Xia?" Nina clenched her fists, not saying a word. When the employee asked the second time, I walked over and took the keys out of Nina's hand. She hissed in pain, her palm red from pressing the keys so hard. Without saying anything, she started to yell at me. "Vivian Xia, what's your problem? I'll have my father." I didn't even listen. I tossed the keys to the employee and recited the license plate, phone number and my name. Then, in front of everyone, I pressed the car lock button on my phone. Beep, the car unlocked. I glanced at it and with a disgusted motion, waved my hand in front of my face, as if something was smelly. "Someone else has been driving it. It's dirty. Take it to get cleaned." I didn't pay attention to Nina's pale face, the colleagues' whispers, or the employee's attempts to curry favor with me. I drove my more discreet car back to my temporary residence. I pulled out my phone, seeing a flood of messages and missed calls from my father. So Nina had told him? What did she say? Was she crying and demanding to know who I was? I was suddenly curious about her distorted and angry expression at that time. I cleared my father's messages, blacklisted his number, and walked into the house. As soon as I lay down on the couch, my mother called. She was a true businesswoman, otherwise, she wouldn't have ventured overseas to develop the market and set up branches. Unfortunately, such a powerful woman was also hopelessly romantic. Back in the day, she almost broke ties with the family over my father, and even threatened to commit suicide. My grandparents, helpless, had allowed it and agreed that she could be with my father. Their only condition was that he would move into her family. I stopped my thoughts and answered the phone. The first thing she said was, "I know about your father having an affair. The information about his mistress and the illegitimate daughter has been sent to your email. Take a look when you have time." I opened my mouth but swallowed the words that had rushed to my throat. Was I really about to ask my hopelessly romantic mother to divorce my father? I was crazy. But then my mother surprisingly mentioned it herself. Her familiar tone was cold and sarcastic, hinting at hidden ferocity. I should have known, men are all useless, they should all die. I gave an awkward smile. I heard her say that she would be returning to the country tomorrow to deal with it. I thought for a moment and asked her to visit Manhwa as well. My mother was suspicious. Why? They've been acting like a pampered princess in the company. Shouldn't I bring her down a peg? My mother paused but agreed. After hanging up, I had time to check my email, seeing who this person was that my father had become involved with. Nina's mother was similar to her, but more delicate, a small, refined woman. Many of the photos in the email showed her clinging to my father's arm, looking at him with adoring eyes. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. My mother was too strong. She held all the power in both our family and the company, which suppressed my father's fragile masculinity. A small, adoring woman was exactly what he needed. I couldn't help but curse my father's image, saying, "Idiot." The next day was the day of Nina's dinner. I arrived at Manhwa early, browsing my phone, watching the discussions in the group chat. The Maserati incident hadn't caused much of a stir. Nina was in the group chat, so even if they wanted to ask or complain, they couldn't do it in front of her. In private, they were probably bursting with questions. Charles had sent me hundreds of messages, asking if I was some hidden wealthy second generation and what my car had to do with Nina's, why I could drive it. I saw them, but I didn't reply. My colleagues arrived quickly. By 10 a.m., almost all the seats were occupied. Nina was late, looking pale. She no longer acted arrogant in front of me, but instead avoided my gaze altogether. I didn't get angry and deliberately moved to sit next to her, smiling. "Did you not sleep well last night? You look terrible." Nina bit her lip, not seeming eager to answer. But with so many colleagues watching her, she had no choice but to open her mouth. "Yeah." That single condescending word sounded like it was killing her. I was laughing inside, seeing her look like she had swallowed a fly but couldn't spit it out. Thinking about the spectacle that would soon unfold, I gave Nina some space, deciding to let her off the hook. I turned away, seeing her relax in relief. The food served to each table was clearly not cheap. My colleagues were delighted. Any doubts they had were pushed aside along with the food. However, as they were about to leave, Nina took out her credit card in front of everyone, ready to pay. Beep. The Manhwa waiter smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, Ms. Your card can't be used." Nina's eyes widened in shock. She quickly pulled out another card. "What about this one? Try it." The same beep sounded again, and the waiter returned the card. Cold sweat was pouring from Nina's forehead. She had a pile of cards beside her, but not one of them would work. She reached into her wallet to find it empty. It meant that she had already tried all of them. The colleagues' murmurs grew louder. They wore strange expressions and began to doubt Nina's heiress identity. Charles muttered a few words. "Isn't Nina Mr. Zhang's daughter? She should be rich, so why can't she pay for a meal?" I didn't respond. Then I saw Nina look weak and hesitantly say, "My card seemed to have some issues, so I can't pay. Can we split the bill?" As soon as the words were spoken, the colleagues objected loudly. "Why should we split the bill? Weren't you supposed to treat us? Manhwa costs 5,800 per person. My monthly salary isn't even that much. I can't pay." "Nina, are you really Mr. Zhang's daughter? How can you not even afford to pay for one meal?" Colleagues who had previously been eager to please Nina were now the main forces in berating her. Especially Gary. She was so angry, her cheeks flushed red as she spat out swear words. Nina was on the verge of collapse. I had seen enough of this show and lightly coughed, walking to Nina's side, handing my card to the waiter. "Charge it to mine, I'll pay for this meal." My colleagues were stunned, and Nina was dumbfounded. This time the POS machine didn't beep, instead it printed a bill. As Nina swayed, I handed the bill to her. "Do you need this? You can take a picture for your social media, so you can still pretend to be the young lady." Someone couldn't help but laugh. Nina's face turned green, her right hand at her side, itching to move. Just before she was about to slap me, my mother slowly walked out, feigning surprise. Oh, what a lively gathering! Before my colleagues could greet my mother, I clung to her arm and called her mom sweetly. She gave my head a pat, her gaze icy as she looked at Nina. "You're Nina, right? The illegitimate daughter Mr. Zhang is keeping." Nina trembled. Her voice was thin and barely audible as she seemed to deny it. But who cared whether she admitted it? My mother said, "I already know what happened with your family, and Mr. Zhang and I are already in the process of divorcing. All the property, houses, and cars he gave to your mother, I'll be taking it all back." Not one thing less. Remember to tell your mom and Mr. Zhang. I'm waiting. See you in court. Thud. Nina couldn't stand it anymore and fell to the ground. My mother didn't seem to like Nina's weak demeanor. She was reminded of another person. As she was about to leave, I pulled her hand and walked to Nina, squatting down. I curled my lips in a smile. My mother said that family money doesn't support outsiders. So the cards you were using earlier, I've had them all frozen. Nina was in a daze. She murmured. So, were you making fun of me watching me try each card just now? Before I could answer, she seemed to be triggered and suddenly tried to attack me. I was no idiot and wouldn't get slapped again. I grabbed her arm, raised my hand and gave her a sharp slap. I used all my strength, seeing Nina's right cheek swell up quickly. I smirked. It's good you understand. Why do you have to say it out loud? It just makes everyone laugh at you. After my father divorced my mother, he was left with nothing because he cheated. He had also tried to use my mother's romantic side, wanting her to forgive him. Crying, he said it was the woman who seduced him, and that he only had my mother in his heart. Even I almost rolled my eyes at this. My mother was speechless. When my father crawled towards her trying to hold her hand, she kicked him hard. She had security drag him out and posted a sign, saying my father and dogs were not allowed inside. Nina also left the company. I heard later that she had been driven a little crazy by what happened. She was often seen roaming around the Manhwa hotel, telling anyone that she was the company's young lady. She was rich and could buy the entire hotel. As for Gary and HR, who had made things difficult for me, they had been fired by my mother and blacklisted. My mother also made sure everyone knew what they had done. Almost all companies in the city knew, and no one dared to hire them. Out of desperation, they had to leave and return to their hometown with their families. Later, my father appeared on the news. Because he had gone from rich to poor, he couldn't cope. And because he was ordered to pay my mother money for divorce settlement, he blamed everything on Nina's mother. He said it was her who had seduced him and ruined his money and power. In a moment of rage, he stabbed Nina and her mother to death. As he was trying to evade the police, he ran into a busy street and was hit by a car going too fast to stop. As the news footage showed my father spitting blood, my mother was sitting next to me, frowning. That's disgusting. Watching that would make me lose my appetite for the whole evening. Seeing her disgusted expression, I couldn't help but laugh and lean into her arms. Good mom, let's promise. No more romantic thoughts in the future. With the useless father gone, my mother's mood improved visibly. I looked out the window, giving a final thought to the man I had called father for 20 years. Things that did not belong to them would eventually be taken back in one form or another.